Our view is that the reign of the Assad family is coming to an end.
We've been through such experiments based on the obsession of toppling some dictators. We know too well how it ends.
While Russia and America's top diplomats hold hours of talks here in Moscow, there's a heated exchange at the UN over a draft resolution proposed on Syria.
Russia's credibility and reputation across the world have been poisoned by its toxic association with Assad.
Beach has shown the only thing he thinks of is to bring confrontation and hostility to the Security Council. Look at me. Don't look away.
Plus, Trump's latest account of the events leading up to the decision to bomb Syria seemed to reveal he wasn't entirely sure who he was actually targeting.
We've just launched 59 missiles heading to Iraq.
Well, you headed to Syria?
Yes, heading toward Syria.
And the ugly face of the beautiful game rears its head again as British football fans turn parts of Madrid into a riot zone. And a Swedish theatre is in hot water after being accused of romanticizing a play which portrays a man radicalized by Islamic State. Thanks for joining us here on RT International, now midday here on Thursday. We start this hour with some news straight from France, where a fire has been reported at the headquarters of the National Front Party. Let's discuss the issue now and cross live to correspondent Charlotte Dubinsky, who's near the building. And Charlotte, what's the latest you can tell us, please?
Well, this fire took place in the early hours of the morning. Now, a group has claimed responsibility for that fire. It's a group called Fighting Xenophobia. They say they threw Molotov cocktails at the building behind me. Now, you might be able to see some of the damage that's being cleared up at the moment. The door leading into this office, which on the ground floor is an insurance firm, and above it are the offices of the National Front, has been damaged. That's been smashed in, and people are now trying to clear the glass away from that. And there was also graffiti sprayed on the wall here, which basically said the National Front against or versus Fighting Xenophobia. This is the name of the group that has claimed this attack on the HQ here of the National Front in Paris. Now, we understand that that fire was put out in the early hours of the morning and has done relatively minimal damage, but enough damage to obviously need to be repaired today. Now, this attack comes just 10 days before people in France go to the elections for the first round of the presidential election here in France. And Marine Le Pen is neck and neck with the independent candidate Emmanuel Macron to go through into the second round, which will see then France deciding who out of those two, if they win this first round, will become France's next president. Now, the group Fighting Xenophobia has also issued a warning saying that between now and the election, we don't know if that's between now and the first round in 10 days or between now and May the 7th when the second election takes place, that they will continue these attacks on the National Front. They haven't said whether that's National Front offices here in Paris or the National Front across France, but of course the party now will be braced for attacks in the lead up to the first election, the first round of the election in 10 days' time, and then again in up to the election on May the 7th. Minimal damage here, but I'm sure this has caused some concern, not just amongst the business which has its premises here at the bottom of the National Front's offices in Paris, but also the National Front knowing that it was attacked. There is security here now on the ground, watching and waiting to see what happens next, Rory.
All right, RT correspondent Charlotte Dubinsky, thank you. Russia has vetoed a draft UN resolution proposed by the US and other Western powers calling on Syria to participate in an investigation into the recent chemical attack in Idlib. After the vote, Russia's representative said the retaliatory strike by the US before any investigation had taken place broke international law.
The strike on the Syrian airbase undertaken before an international investigation had been conducted is in violation of international law and unsanctioned by the Security Council. Acceptance of the draft resolution would have meant the legitimization of the strike, and this, from the point of view of international law and common sense, is unacceptable.
Russian pride in the Astana process has been turned to humiliation, and Russia's credibility and reputation across the world have been poisoned by its toxic association with Assad. They have chosen to side with a murderous, barbaric criminal rather than with their international peers. They have chosen the wrong side of history.
Выступление представителя Великобритании.
UK Representative Rycroft's speech has shown the only thing he thinks of is to bring confrontation and hostility to the Security Council. And the reason for this, and many at the UN know about it, is that you're scared. You lost sleep because we could work together with the US. That's what you're afraid of. You do everything you can to undermine such cooperation. Look at me. Don't look away. So it turns out that regime change in Syria is more important to you.
Along with stressing the US strike violated international norms, Russia's deputy envoy also said other states and international organizations are making little effort to inspect the site of the chemical attack. Well, the future of Syria and the Assad government also dominated the US Secretary of State's first official visit to Moscow. Rex Tillerson met with his Russian counterpart Sergey Lavrov and had an unscheduled and private meeting with President Putin. And after hours of talks, the diplomats addressed the media.
Clearly, our view is that the reign of the Assad family is coming to an end. And they have, again, brought this on themselves.
We've been through such experiments based on the obsession of toppling some dictator. We know too well how it ends. I can't remember any positive example when a dictator was toppled and then everything went smoothly.
What we do know, and we have very firm and high confidence in our conclusions, that the attack was planned, carried out by the regime forces at the direction of Bashar al-Assad.
I can only confirm once again that just like what circled Russian hackers, we would like to get factual evidence regarding chemical incidents in Syria without numerous claims.
It was a packed agenda for Mr. Tillerson's visit to Moscow. Our correspondent Ilya Petrenko now looking back at the first day's events.
It's exactly 11 o'clock, the scheduled arrival of Mr. Tillerson, and it looks like a record-breaking crowd of journalists in this room.
На шаг назад, пожалуйста. Еще мало. Еще. Это пройти здесь нельзя. Вас снесут.
Mr. Secretary's late, but just by a couple of minutes. Cameras are pointing at the flags, but Rex Tillerson and Sergey Lavrov won't come for another 20 minutes. At this point in the room, only Ambassador Teft knows what's been going on behind closed doors. At last, the diplomats sit down, and one U.S. reporter just decides everyone's a guest on her own show. What a telling off she gets then.
How confident are you, Mr. Secretary?
Who was briefing you on? Who was giving you your message?
Another few minutes, and the massive journalist pack are kicked out of the room.
The doors are now closed, so let's count how long the meeting will take.
In a bit more than 2 hours. Enough talking in this room. Time for more here with food. On the menu today, dock leaf soup, crispy fried smelt fish, and apple pie. Something that looks like this. Chewing over what will happen with our world tomorrow.
Somewhere behind this window. Now, this is the porch where former Secretary of State John Kerry or Sergey Lavrov used to come out to have a smoke or maybe make a phone call, but so far we haven't seen anyone.
From then on, a blackout for journalists. No one's allowed anywhere. The only time I see Rex Tillerson's face, or part of it actually, is when his motorcade drives off at 2:47 p.m. And he goes to, you won't believe it, the Ritz-Carlton. That very same hotel where Donald Trump was accused of, doing those dirty deeds. Reporters are left to wait in a room that just can't fit us all. 5:30, someone gives a heads up. The white Chevrolets have left the Ritz. Mr. Tillerson is heading to the Kremlin. 2 hours of conversation with Vladimir Putin in mega secrecy. Not only do we not get any footage, in fact, we don't get a single photo of the two together. So what? Are we to hear about any breakthroughs at the presser? 8:33, the long-awaited press event begins. Here are my highlights.
We discussed no change in the status of sanctions.
The U.S. Secretary of State has not threatened us with sanctions. Actually, he has not threatened us with anything at all.
There is a low level of trust between our two countries. We need to attempt to put an end to this steady degradation, which is doing nothing to restore the trust between our two countries or to make progress on the issues of the greatest importance to both of us.
Russia remains open to dialogue between countries in various range of spheres, and we're dedicated not only to said dialogue, but to our joint actions as well.
Is that it? No ultimatums or sanctions thrown at Moscow? Or otherwise, no dancing to Putin's tune by Trump's pick for the State Department top job?
New U.S. Secretary of State, 5 hours of talks with Lavrov, 2 with Putin, and then 60 minutes of talking to the press. But really, anything substantially new when it comes to how the U.S. gets along with Russia? We understand that we got to improve our relations, but still, there are many, many differences, and Assad will have to go.
Meanwhile, with all eyes on Syria, the world heard Trump's latest and slightly bizarre account of the events leading up to his decision to bomb that country.
We had the most beautiful piece of chocolate cake that you've ever seen, and President Xi was enjoying it. So what happens is, I said, we've just launched 59 missiles heading to Iraq.
Well, you headed to Syria?
Yes, heading toward Syria.
The U.S. ambassador, meantime, to the U.S., Nikki Haley, said that Washington is, quote, prepared to do more after the Syria strike. And she recounted the story of one family which suffered in the alleged chemical attack. RT's Caleb Mopan reports.
As soon as the votes were in and Russia had vetoed the resolution, accusations started flying. UK Ambassador Rycroft accused Russia of protecting the Syrian government. And Nikki Haley, the ambassador of the United States, told heart-wrenching stories about children who had suffered in the chemical attack in Idlib.
Abdel Hamid Al-Youssef put his twin 9-month-old babies in the ground last week. Each branch of Abdel's extended family reportedly got its own trench to bury their dead. One family, 22 victims. Abdel held his twins in his arms. He tried to keep himself together. He tried to stop his tears. All Abdel could say before putting his twins in their final resting place was, "Say goodbye, baby, say goodbye." 2 of the smallest victims of the Assad regime's vicious and barbaric chemical attack. No one anywhere in the world should ever have to face that kind of suffering.
Nikki Haley wasn't the only one to be moved by images of children suffering in the aftermath of the chemical attack. Ivanka Trump, the president's daughter and assistant, was so moved that she pushed her father to attack Syria. Eric Trump, her brother, has confirmed that. You can't ignore the suffering of the children in Idlib, but aren't they forgetting something? The Iraqi city of Mosul is being bombarded relentlessly by coalition forces. Many civilians in that city, including many children, are in dire circumstances.
220,000 children in West Mosul, old city, are in extreme danger. You've seen also reports that children are injured in the fighting or also have been used as a human shield. We see many like schools or public buildings that have clearly been used as ISIS bases, which is also a very big concern for the safety of children.
Many of you will remember little Haura. She's lost her eyesight, and doctors believe that she may never see again. She was the sole survivor of a U.S. coalition airstrike in the Iraqi city of Mosul. But apparently the lives of these children don't have the same value to the folks in Washington, D.C. Caleb Maupin, RT, New York.
We heard from Medea Benjamin, who is the co-founder of the human rights group Global Exchange. She claims there are clear double standards from the Trump administration when it comes to civilian suffering, which is not just confined to Iraq or Syria.
The Trump administration is really concerned, as he said in the case of Syria, about the deaths of beautiful babies. We ask him to look at the beautiful babies that are being killed every 10 minutes, one child in Yemen dying from the effects of this war. The U.S. is providing all of the weapons, the maintenance for those weapons, the refueling of the airplanes in the air, and providing logistical support. So I would say the U.S. was fully aware of all the civilian targets that have been hit. It's a terrible indication that the Trump administration is going to get the U.S. further involved in the war in Yemen, and is also going to give a green light to the Saudis to go on the attack even more.
Quarter past the hour here in Moscow. Thanks for joining us so far for the program. Violent scenes playing out in Madrid as British football fans clash head-on with police. Story and pictures in a moment.
What politicians do is something we don't do. They put themselves on the line, and they get accepted or rejected. So when you want to be president, why would you want to be? Why would someone want to be president? What's it like to be president? What's it like when the phone rings at 3 in the morning? Can't be a good call. I'm interested always in the whys and the hows. And Q Larry. Question more.
Good to have you with us today for the program. Madrid's historic square was turned into a battlefield overnight after British football fans clashed with Spanish police ahead of their club's Champions League match. According to Spanish media, the trouble started when a group of supporters from the English club Leicester City started throwing bottles at police who responded with tear gas. British fans also shouted obscenities and set off some types of smoke bombs. And at least 8 people were arrested for public disorder and vandalism. 3 police officers were said to have been injured as well. Now, the long-running territorial dispute between the UK and Spain over Gibraltar, which recently escalated over the Brexit issue, seems to have potentially added fuel to the fire.
Gibraltar is us! Gibraltar is us! Gibraltar is us!
After reports of the clashes started coming in, many British media outlets were defending the fans, saying the Spanish police were to blame. One BBC journalist claimed the fans were just simply walking along chanting slogans when police attacked them for no apparent reason. Well, earlier we heard from Professor of Sociology at Aston University, Ellis Cashmore. He says wherever British fans go, security forces are always on heightened alert, and for good reason.
Wherever English fans go, I suppose British fans, I should make that, everywhere in the world, I think security forces are on alert because British fans have a very well-earned and well-documented reputation for causing mayhem and disturbance pretty much wherever they go in the world. We do not see much in the way of violence at British stadiums at the moment. It's gone quiet over here, but whenever British fans travel abroad, as they are this evening and as they will be next year, of course, to the World Cup, then I think security forces are wary and suspicious that there may well be violence.
And this comes less than 2 months since a BBC documentary on Russian fans was first broadcast.
I'm going to Russia to meet the hooligans who hold the fate of England fans in their hands. Men who reject the negative image of the past to embrace a new identity.
It claimed British fans travelling to Russia for World Cup 2018 will be risking their lives. According to the documentary, hardline Russian supporters have promised a festival of violence. And to cap it all off, it was alleged the Russian government is somehow involved. Well, Ellis Cashmore again believes the Western media's coverage of football violence is typically hypocritical.
The Western media are great hypocrites in the sense that they criticize violence when it's perpetrated by fans overseas, often neglecting the fact that the people who gave hooliganism to the world were in fact the English. It's called when the pot calls the kettle black. In the 1960s and 70s, practically every game in Britain had some violent element. And of course, other countries across the world, not just in Europe, but around the world, have done exactly the same thing. I won't say they copied the English, but certainly this is where it started. So it's an embarrassment, frankly. When we get the opportunity to criticize fans from elsewhere in the world for doing exactly the kind of thing that has been going on in Britain for many decades, then we take that opportunity. And I think that is what's happening here. I think that we're looking at Russia particularly as the host of the next World Cup, and we have focused on the fact that some elements of football fans in Russia are preparing for violence. Whether they're preparing to perpetrate it or defend themselves, I don't really know, but I suggest the former. There is now a kind of, I think, a preparedness, a willingness to believe just about anything about Russia at the moment. So it won't surprise me if Russia has more blame heaped on it, even despite what's going on tonight or last night.
Not long after the BBC documentary, Premier League side Manchester United had to face the Russian club FC Rostov in a Europa League game. British fans were warned against travelling to Russia for the match. Those brave enough to go were strongly advised to keep a low profile and be wary of potential violence. But in front of the cameras, the Russian fans were ready and waiting.
Welcome to Russia. Hello there. Thank you very much. Мы сегодня победим. Welcome to Russia. Welcome to Russia. Okay. Thank you very much. It's very good of you to do this. Thank you. Welcome to Russia and thank you. All good.
Gothenburg City Theatre in Sweden has found itself in a storm of controversy over a new play which portrays a young man being radicalized. The story tells of a man who heads to Syria to join a terrorist organization. According to the writer, the aim was to humanize a jihadist who's being slowly influenced by Islamic State. But the production sparked immediate concern. One of those outraged was a Swedish MP who said the play romanticized Islamic terrorism and one cannot excuse genocide. The theatre's director said it's important to stage the production, especially after last week's deadly Islamic attack in Stockholm that left 4 people dead when a truck plowed through crowds of shoppers. And we discussed the issue with 2 guests.
People are concerned that there is an ever-increasing threat from terrorism, and we've got to confront that. And the way you do that is deal with the ideology. You deal with the root causes of why there is that terrorism, primarily, I would say, foreign policy. And then you allow people to try to understand what is behind this mindset. And if you can use a theatre to do that, if you can use classroom-based activities, and anything that helps us understand that mindset, I think is welcome, and we should encourage it.
Have they actually shown the true side of it in this? But I very much doubt it. This is one person's view of it. Is it an actual view? Is it actually based on fact? Or is it open to the artist's interpretation, which a lot of plays are dealt with? You know, what has he left out?
If we want to eradicate the threat from terrorism in our country, then the best way to do that is to confront the ideology behind the violence, look at the root causes as to why that is happening, and yes, getting into the minds of these extremists. Freedom of speech allows people to come together and to watch and participate and partake in such activities, and that should remain.
So they tend to be they tend to be hypocrites when it comes to plays and freedom of speech and various interpretations. One of the things we've got to be able to say is, okay, that's your interpretation of that play. Let us do a play of our interpretation, and our interpretation is the mosque, is the imams and the preachers on our streets. If we wanted to do a play like that, you can guarantee it'd be shut down very quickly because it'd be classed as a hate play.
Up next here on RT International, the Kaiser Report looking at the biggest problems facing Wall Street and the Trump effect in the financial world.